Welcome to UBC for the third annual John S. MacDonald Lecture held by the Outer Space Institute. The John S. MacDonald Lecture is made possible through a generous donation by MDA, Canada's leading space company with iconic contributions to space exploration, such as the Canadarm and RadarSat-2. John MacDonald was a student and professor at UBC in 1969 with a friend and colleague, Vern Detweiler. John co-founded MacDonald Detweiler and Associates in the basement of his home in Vancouver, which grew to become MDA, the MDA that we know today. We are joined here by family members of the MacDonald family, and Alfredette, thank you so much for being here. My name is Aaron Boley. I'm a professor in physics and astronomy here at UBC, and I co-direct the Outer Space Institute with my colleague, Professor Michael Byers, an international lawyer and political scientist. The Outer Space Institute is a global network of transdisciplinary researchers united in their commitment to addressing grand challenges associated with humanity's use and exploration and expansion into outer space. Michael and I had the pleasure of engaging with John MacDonald while the OSI was in its infancy. I am excited for this discussion, and to that end, please allow me to introduce today's moderator, Charlotte Hook, a PhD student in political science at UBC and a junior fellow of the Outer Space Institute. Charlotte's research has focused on the nexus of space security and space sustainability. She has led work on uncontrolled reentries of abandoned objects in orbit, such as rocket bodies, and their risk to aviation. She is further working on regulation of the environmental impacts of megaconstellations. And finally, special thank you to the Frederick Wood staff, to the OSI fellows who are here today, and to all of you who are joining us for this conversation this afternoon. Charlotte, please.
Hi, everyone. I would like to welcome everyone here to the third annual John S. MacDonald Lecture, and I'm delighted that everyone here could join us for what promises to be an engaging and insightful discussion. As Aaron said, my name is Charlotte Hook, and I am a PhD student in the political science department here, and I specialize in outer space governance and politics, and I will be the moderator for this discussion. So let me introduce you to our two distinguished guest speakers, Marc Garneau and Dorin Prunariu, who both bring a wealth of expertise and knowledge on space travel, politics, and diplomacy, and who will share their perspectives on their respective careers during the course of this discussion. So I'm going to read some bios for each of them so you have a greater sense of who we are joined with. So Marc Garneau, on my right, is a Canadian naval officer, astronaut, and politician who was the first Canadian to go to space in 1984 on board the US Space Shuttle Challenger as a payload specialist. He returned to space again in 1996 and 2000, and in 2001, Marc became the executive vice president of the Canadian Space Agency before being appointed president later that year. Marc then left the CSA to run as a Liberal candidate in the 2006 federal election, and following this defeat, ran again in 2008, this time winning a seat in Parliament. Marc then became the Minister of Transport in 2015 before being appointed Foreign Affairs Minister in 2021. Marc retired from politics in 2023 and released his memoir last year entitled A Most Extraordinary Ride, Space Politics and the Pursuit of the Canadian Dream. Dumitru Dorin Prunariu is a Romanian cosmonaut and a diplomat who was the first Romanian in space, traveling aboard the Salyut 6 space station aboard the Soyuz 40 in 1981. He is one of the founding members of the Association of Space Explorers, founded in 1985, and then served as its president from 2011 to 2014. From 1998 to 2004, he was the president of the Romanian Space Agency before serving as the Romanian ambassador to the Russian Federation for a year. From 2010 to 2012, he was the chair of the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Exploration of Outer Space, also known as UNCOPUS. In 2012, Dorin was selected as one of 15 experts to the group of governmental experts on the outer space transparency and confidence building measures. From 2018 to 2021, Dorin was vice chair of the Space 2030 Working Group at UNCOPUS, and last year negotiated on behalf of the Romanian delegation the creation of the Action Team on Lunar Activities Consultation. We will start the discussion with a few questions for Marc and Dorin to answer before moving on to questions from the audience. I encourage you to think of your questions during this time. So first, for each of you, both of you are the first from your countries to travel to space, a historic moment for each nation that has inspired generations. Could you describe for us what inspired each of you to undertake these journeys? Yeah. We'll start with Dorin.
Good evening to anyone, or good afternoon still. I'm very honored to be here, to be invited to speak to you, and tomorrow for the workshop, the professional workshop. Thank you, Charlotte, for moderating this round table. Let's see. Actually, answering to questions, I could say that space flight itself, it's an extraordinary adventure for the human being. In the 64 years of piloted aeronautics, about 640 people have flown into space. So an average of 10 astronauts every year. With a population of 8 billion people on Earth, the percentage of people who have experienced the cosmos is extremely small. I can say that, first of all, space flights takes you out of the natural environment in which you were born and grew, and takes you into weightlessness, where you endure a whole series of transformations in your organism. From up there, you can admire your native planet entirely. The more you see it from a greater distance, the more you perceive it as a unified whole, and you begin to wonder why there is so much injustice and on its surface. There are wars, there is pollution. You are also impressed by the thinness of the Earth's atmosphere, and you are worried about the fact that it is so little protection by humans. You return from the outer space with a physical desire to protect the planet, to convey your experience to people and to make them cooperate, to understand each other better for the good of all of us and save our unique home, which is planet Earth. Regarding personal challenges, I can say that in spaceflight, there are people who are very well prepared and motivated to reach and to work in space after hundreds of hours in the simulator, where you learn how to deal with the most difficult situations that can arise during the flight. Where if something special happens, you act with cool blood and do your best to solve the situations. Of course, emotions are human, and you can't get rid of them. But they are positive and don't influence negatively your work.
Thank you. Marc, what inspired you to go on this journey to become an astronaut?
Well, thank you, Charlotte, and good to be with you, Dorin, and thank you all for coming this afternoon, and great to see members of the MacDonald family. I had the pleasure of knowing John MacDonald back in the days when I was at the Canadian Space Agency. Well, very simply put, what made me want to become an astronaut, I think there's three things. One is, growing up, I had certainly watched the Soviet and American space programs with great interest. I remember when Yuri Gagarin became the first human being to go into space, and that was really ushering in a new era of space exploration, and it fascinated me. I wasn't thinking of becoming an astronaut when I was young, but I certainly watched it with great interest. And secondly, I would say that I'm very curious by nature. I've always been curious. My mother told me when I was young, "Why do you always say why when we talk about things?" I just wanted to know why things were the way they were. So I was curious. Secondly, I've always had a sense of adventure. I feel that we're only on the planet for one life, and I do like adventure. And that also, to me, appealed about spaceflight. As Dorin said, there's only about 640 people who've been into space. I was the 150th. Dorin went before me, but so it's a small group. And thirdly, I'm willing to accept some risk in my life, and not everybody is willing to do that. I call it controlled risk, informed risk, but I was willing to do that. So when the ad came out in the papers in Canada in 1983 that Canada was going to choose some astronauts, I just couldn't resist. I didn't think I'd be chosen, but I applied, and my dream came true.
Thank you. Space travel is an extraordinary achievement, but as you said, comes with its fair share of challenges, controlled risk. Marc, can you share with us some of the most surprising or difficult moments from your missions in space, and what did you take away from these experiences?
Well, thank you. And Dorin mentioned this. Spaceflight is complex. It can comport risks when you're trying to, in my case, my 3 shuttle flights involved going from a speed of 0 to a speed of 28,000 kilometers an hour, which is orbital velocity. And lots of things can happen when you release that much energy. And you have to be prepared for every eventuality. Not every eventuality is survivable, but there is quite a bit of redundancy built into the space shuttle, and you have to learn how to deal with the what-ifs on your way up there during that 8.5-minute ride. So training to be ready for that is probably the most demanding part of it. In terms of the work I did up there, I think probably the most demanding for me, I operated the Canadarm on 2 of my missions. In one of them, the second mission, I had to capture a free-flying spacecraft and put it back in the payload bay of the orbiter. And on my last flight, we were building the International Space Station. So we were bringing up a truss segment which had the first solar panels on it way back in the year 2000. And I had to lift it out of the payload bay with the Canadarm again and position it so it could be attached to the space station. And those are moments that are certainly very highly visible, and they're really an extremely important part of the mission, and you don't want to screw up. And so that perhaps is where there's a certain amount of tension in what you're doing. You're saying to yourself, I hope I don't mess this up. And I will say one last thing. Dorin and I were the first from our countries, and so the morning of my first launch, I realized that a lot of Canadians had turned on their television sets, and I wanted to make them proud. But I felt a certain pressure on my shoulders that I really had to make this a successful mission. So there's that kind of pressure as well. But fortunately, it all worked out.
Dorin, you mentioned on your space travels, you looked to Earth and it reconstructed how you saw life on Earth. How can we have all these injustices on such a unified planet? So could you expand on that and sort of other takeaways you took from your space mission and how it impacted your life once you returned?
Actually, when you see the Earth from the outer space, you are very, very impressed. So I was very, very curious during my training to see as soon as possible the Earth from the outer space. You see the planet without borders, without names. It's just the natural Earth seen from up there. But at the same time, you are very much impressed by the thinness of the atmosphere. And you really, really are worried looking at it and understanding what happened down on Earth. And I can tell you that maybe you don't realize exactly during your space flight all these things, but after you come back to the Earth and you start interact with different organizations, different people, you have in mind that image of the Earth, and you start to think globally, to think how the things are interacted on Earth, what we have to do to protect the Earth and to protect the atmosphere, because all life is developed here in this atmosphere of the Earth. And the Earth is our only planet, only home. We don't have another home. Okay, Elon Musk wants to send us to Mars. And okay, the people will fly to Mars. The people will fly to the moon. But the moon and Mars and any other planet or asteroids, they are not our home. The planet Earth will rest forever our home. But let's see, let's protect it and don't destroy it. The feeling of doing something very specific, to convincing people to do things on Earth, to protect better the nature, it's very obvious.
Since your space missions, both of you have transitioned into careers in public service. Dorin, what called you to take on, the role as an international diplomat for Romania, and how did your space mission factor into this?
Yes, I can tell you that all of us flying into the outer space, we become public persons. Everybody knows us, including the politicians, and as long as we have a lot of speeches and express our opinions on different things, they are taken into consideration, not only by the people, also by leaders in different environments, institutions, and such way it's so easy to pass from the space activity to diplomatic activity or to any other important activity in your country. So in 1990, I was the Deputy Minister of Transportation and the head of the Civil Aviation Department. Marc also was the Minister of Transportation. Then I was the President of the Romanian Space Agency. Also, I was pressed by my government to accept the position of the Ambassador of Romania to the Russian Federation. Speaking Russian during my training, knowing better people, habits, how to deal with them, it was very important to have a person there who can achieve things. So I had many other positions. From 1992, I started to work within the UN. I was the representative of Romania, many times the head of the Romanian delegation to the sessions of the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Twice I was the chairman, once of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, once of the full committee. For 2 years, each of them, I was the co-vice chair of the working group on Space 2030 agenda and many other positions. So it's not easy. You have to prepare any such position because just the space flight doesn't give you the ability to deal professionally with all these things. I graduated from the Diplomatic Academy, a special course for ambassadors, to deal with the civil aviation because I'm a military person. I'm a retired 3-star general from the Air Force in Romania. To deal with the civil aviation, I was trained here in Canada, in Montreal. A special course for 2 months, how to deal, how to manage at a higher level the problems in the civil aviation. So all these things just gather together. And in time, you see, now my experience could be spread. I explained to the young people how to do, what I did, and my example is taken into consideration many times.
Marc, do you resonate with what Dorin said about feeling like a public person when you went to space, and did that factor into your decision to become a politician or to be part of the CSA?
I do, and I'm surprised at how many parallels there are between my professional life and Dorin's professional life. I think I was drawn to public service by my father. He was a military officer and he served in the Second World War. And he always made me feel that to serve your country, which is what I did initially by joining the Navy, was a good thing. And of course, I continued doing it when I was in the space program. And then I was approached when I was 56, and somebody suggested I should go into politics. And to me, after thinking about it, I thought that this is another way to serve my country. However, I realized something very, very important when I made that transition to politics. When I was an astronaut, everybody liked me. So I'll stop there.
So, Dorin, you are one of the founding members of the Association of Space Explorers and later served as its president. So you've seen firsthand sort of the power of cooperation between those from different nations, same with your time at UN COPUOS. In your experience, what are the key challenges and benefits of fostering international collaboration in space exploration, and how can we build upon the successes we've already had?
Yes. I can say that working with the UN gave me a huge experience in how to deal at a multilateral level. So the diplomacy, it's different when we work in an international organization, and it's different when we work bilaterally with a country. And many times I had the opportunity to negotiate different things within the UN. What I think it's necessary for all countries in the international diplomacy and to deal with, it's the creation and enforcing regulations. You need to have regulations respected by anyone in any country. And the UN is the right body, international body, to regulate a lot of things connected with the outer space, and also the diplomacy help establishing international treaties and agreements that govern space activities. Also fostering collaboration. Space diplomacy encourages collaboration between countries, even those with political or economical tensions on Earth. Joint missions like the International Space Station exemplify how nations can work together for common scientific and technical goals. Managing space debris, it's a very important thing. All countries have to think about it, because now there are about 80 countries launched at least one satellite into the outer space. And now there are regulations. Of course, they are voluntary measures, but anyone tries to respect them, approved by the United Nations, and how to construct and how to bring back the satellite when it dies, when it's not more functioning. Preventing militarization, it's a tough problem. Okay, we say preventing, the militarization is also always there, but how to minimize the militarization of the outer space, it's also an important problem, because anytime any big power could start a war from the outer space and you are not defended from up there. If you don't have such a structure like the other ones, you are not defended. And most countries, they are menaced in case of a space war by this technology placed to the outer space. Helping people to understand each other and to cooperate, it's represented also by the share of knowledge and technology. Diplomatic channels enable the sharing of knowledge and technology between countries. This collaboration accelerates technological advancements and ensure that the benefits of space exploration are shared globally. Within the UN, we insist very much in sharing the benefits for the outer space and on the access of the developing countries and the new actors into the outer space to be helped to develop different programs for them as well, to take part in big programs with their expertise, scientists sometimes. Also, looking to the outer space, it's very important to balance the economic and ethical considerations. Without ethical considerations, you can destroy a lot of things into the outer space. By instance, ethical things says that when you reach another planet or the moon, you don't have to destroy the environment. You don't have to modify the environment to keep it as it was. And where you work, after you finish, just bring everything back as it was before. So there are many, many other things that you have to take into consideration when you work at the international level.
Marc, as a politician, you were the Liberal Party's foreign affairs critic, and before later becoming the Minister of Foreign Affairs during the COVID-19 pandemic. Do you share with Dorin, what he said about the challenges of international collaboration and the priority of having transparency and communication with each other?
Absolutely, absolutely. Canada has been involved in space since we built our first spacecraft, and it was launched in 1962. So Canada was the third country to ever design and build a satellite. It was called Alouette 1. And let me just say this. For example, if we turned off every one of the spacecraft, particularly communication satellites that are up there orbiting Earth, if we turn them all off right now, it would paralyze us down here on Earth. We have become a society that is so dependent on what communication satellites can bring us, that ability to connect worldwide. If we turned off the navigation satellites that tell us where we are anywhere on the surface of the Earth, if we turned off those GPS satellites, we wouldn't be able to say, oh, okay, it's really simple for me to drive from here to some other place and to know where I am. So space has brought enormous benefits to humanity. And what's happening now is that there's literally an explosion of it happening. And as Dorin made very, very clear, we want to make sure that it doesn't turn into the Wild West. Because if so many countries are putting spacecraft or want to put spacecraft up there, and I'll mention MacDonald MDA is going to be building close to 200 of them to put up communication satellites, light-speed satellites in the coming decade. The Starlink constellation, Elon Musk's, we're talking thousands of spacecraft. If we are to develop space, whether it's low Earth orbit or going to the moon or cislunar space, which is between here and the moon and around the moon, with everybody being so interested in going there, and I won't mention the astronomers are very upset, of course, by all of the light pollution from these spacecraft, but we also have to be very sensitive to the fact that we must do this in a regulated way. And that involves international cooperation, so that it isn't just one country deciding, I'm going to do this and going ahead with it. There are international bodies that look at orbits and look at frequencies, but it is really expanding so rapidly now. There is concern that things could get out of hand, not to mention the issues of debris and other factors. So we have to, and I'm trying to remember who said it, but basically space development now has gotten ahead of space law. I think it was John Holcomb who said it. We have to be concerned that we're going too fast and in a less than ideally regulated way. Yes, these things can improve our lives, but we have to make sure that we do it in an orderly fashion. I think the UN is the place to bring those regulations into being, but it also requires the cooperation of all the countries that are becoming spacefaring nations. And it is of concern.
Following on from this, what do you see as Canada's role then with all these pressing challenges and the need for collaboration? Should Canada be a key player in those discussions?
Well, definitely, Canada should try to be a key player because we are a country that puts spacecraft into space, whether it's for communications or Earth observation or participating cooperatively with other countries. And it's in our interests to be a vocal country with respect to this, but we need other countries as well. So basically, I think that Canada should be talking with other countries so that we can have an agreement with all the spacefaring nations that we've got to do this in an orderly way. People are aware of Antarctica, for example, where here on Earth we seem to have basically respected the fact that Antarctica is a place that belongs to pretty much everybody, and some very good science is done there. But perhaps the fact that there isn't necessarily a business case for going to Antarctica or perhaps natural resources and things like that has helped to keep it, fairly low key. Everybody wants to do good things together in terms of science, but space, the moon, that's a different matter. And there it's really, really important that we, like in Antarctica, that we all come together and work in a cooperative manner and in a way that is regulated.
Dorin, you are currently involved in the action team on lunar activities consultation, also known as ATLAC, at UN COPUS, which is an initiative to, try and kickstart a solution to many of the challenges we face when looking at lunar exploration. Can you describe for us sort of the purpose of this group and what ATLAC is set out to achieve?
Yes, of course. But first, I would like to bring to your attention an alarming situation that occurred in the beginning of 2024. At that time, there were 6 lunar orbiters registered in the Multi-Mission Automatic Deep Space Conjunction Assessment process at NASA, GPL. Chinese orbiter is not included because they didn't provide the data about their satellite. 3 of those missions, the US LRO, the Korea's KPLO, the India's Chandrayaan-2 orbiters were more or less in the same orbit at about 100 kilometers high above the moon. And they had frequent encounters, collision alerts. Sometimes they also had collision risks with lunar landers, by instance with the Japanese SLIM and Hakuto lander. And from February 2023 to May 2024, there were 41 red alarms, and those risks were mitigated through 4 ordinary orbit maintenance maneuvers and 4 dedicated collision avoidance maneuvers. 3 of them were performed by the Korean satellite mission. Due to the absence of an international protocol among all agencies for resolving collision risks, coordinating solutions were found through discussions, including email exchange and teleconferences. So it's not so fast, it's not a mechanism to deal with in the future. And to facilitate the exchange of information and consultations on lunar operations, the Romanian delegation, I personally, proposed within COPUOS the formation of an action team on lunar activities consultations. It's very important to share information at the level of the UN. If some of the member states don't talk to each other bilaterally, take the example of US and China. So they have some rules, they have some restrictions, okay, but they have to share information in a multilateral organization, like this action team. But this action team, the main goal is to determine a permanent mechanism at the level of COPUOS to deal with consultations, cooperation, and many other things in the future. We have to determine in the framework of this ATLAC how to deal in the future with these processes, because the moon activity will continue for decades from now. So China, US, and all their allies, they want to establish permanent bases on the moon, at the south pole of the moon. So this mechanism, this action team now, I felt that it was very, very necessary. Having the experience of working with the UN for many, many years, I told you in the beginning, I started to represent Romania from 1992, and I have different positions. I started to deal with the moon about 4 years ago, step by step. In the beginning, I started to deal in the Moon Village Association. We issue a report about all these procedures, how to work on the moon, what to do with not harmful, to not have harmful interferences, to save each other in case of catastrophes and so on. And that report was presented to the UN, but the Moon Village Association is just an NGO. An NGO can't make proposals, very specific proposals at the UN. It's not a member state. And then I convinced my Ministry of Foreign Affairs to take it on us, and on behalf of Romania, I make this proposal. And for half a year, I organized in the framework of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, Legal Subcommittee, and the full committee, a lot of informal consultations. And I consult with all member states. I took into account their proposals, and in the end, we established the terms of reference, the mandates, and the method of work of this ATLAC, and it was approved in June last year. Now we have to start work.
So this will be my last question to each of you before we move on to audience questions. So, Marc, looking towards the future of outer space, we've talked about this a bit, but what do you believe are the most pressing challenges that countries need to solve, and what is the role of international diplomacy in this?
Well, in addition to what we've just been talking about, the need to have a standard and a regulatory framework that will apply to all countries in space. If I look at Canada, specifically, what's important for Canada, I would say a number of things. One is we're the second largest country on Earth, and space offers us the opportunity to continue to do very important work in terms of observing our planet. With the changes that are taking place down on Earth, space can provide a vantage point which can help us with assessing climate change, with monitoring and identifying critical forest fires, with monitoring our high seas where there is a great deal of illegal fishing, monitoring natural disasters, oil spills at sea, ice flows in the Arctic, which affect navigation. It's a very powerful tool, and I think Earth observation is extremely important. Secondly, we must provide our scientists with the opportunity to use space because they can do some very important things in space, whether they're astrophysicists or astronomers or oceanographers or atmospheric scientists. There are so many things that can be done that can't be done on Earth, but that can be done in space. And Canada has a rich tradition of expertise in space science starting. That's what first got us involved, was upper atmospheric physics. Thirdly, I believe that we need to continue to the human exploration of space. You're not going to be surprised that I feel that way about it because it's been an important part of my life. And Canada has managed to be a player through cooperation with other countries in the exploration of space. I mean, I'm so thrilled that a Canadian will fly on the Artemis 2 mission. Fingers crossed, in 2026, Jeremy Hansen, he will be the first non-American to go as far as the moon. They won't land on the moon, they'll orbit it. But that, I think, is a particular point of pride for Canadians that we have, over the decades, participated in the human exploration of space, whether it's in flights on the shuttle to the space station or potentially, eventually, to the moon. So I think those are important things that we must continue to do, and I hope that Canada will continue to be a major player in that respect.
Dorin, the same question for you. What do you believe are the most pressing challenges in space that countries need to be solved, and what is the role of international diplomacy in this?
Yes, I represent a country not so big at European level. We are members of the European Space Agency, but in the same time we develop a national space program. It's promising, it's not so big. It helps a lot of companies in Romania to reach the international level. We finance startups that become important in time, but as an emerging space nation, and connected with the moon activity, I consider that the capacity building is one of the important problems. Providing training, resources and technical support to emerging space programs to help them develop the necessary capabilities for lunar exploration. It's important. We are the signatories of the Artemis Accords. Romania signed the accord, was the 16th country in 2022. Now, if I'm not mistaken, there are 52 signatories of these accords. And we try to not only to agree to the principles of exploring the outer space, the other bodies, Moon, Mars, and so on, but also to take part in different activities directly connected with these things. The international partnership is very important as well, encouraging partnership between established space agencies and emerging space programs to share knowledge, technology, and resources is very important. Inclusive frameworks represents the creating an inclusive international framework that ensure all countries, regardless of their current space capabilities, can participate in the exploration of the outer space and now in the moon exploration. Mentorship programs, they are also very important, and funding and investment. Securing funding and investment for emerging space programs through international collaboration and partnership with private industry. Now you see how important is the private industry. You see the moon, it's approached by SpaceX, by Blue Origin. Jeff Bezos also just launched the New Glenn rocket, which is a huge one, and will reach the moon also with such a powerful horse that will fly into space. So we have to interfere and to favorize the development of private industry anywhere where it's possible, because they use more efficiently the funds, and they look for ways of developing their activities faster and much more focused than any government institution.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to audience questions. We have mics, so if you have a question, please put your hand up and one of our helpers will come with the mic so you can ask. Yep, up on the left here. If you could introduce yourself as well, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. My name is Satyam. I actually studied in UBC, finished my bachelor's back in 2023, and now currently working in the School of Biomedical Engineering. My question was to both of you. Dorin, you talked about the Artemis Accords, and given that China and Russia, who have played such an important role in human exploration, and given that they have not signed the Artemis Accords and are instead pursuing their own lunar initiatives, how do you anticipate fostering international collaboration in space exploration to ensure it remains a unified effort, so that we go to the moon and Mars as humanity and not be divided?
Okay, first, this initiative, ATLAC, it's favorizing the change of information, sharing of information, and in the future, the cooperation in some fields connected with space activities. Of course, China has also its own program. They intend to build on the moon an international research station, which will function automatically in the beginning. But also they promise to land a person on the moon before 2030. And this is not so far from now, 6 years. We watched the Artemis program. It's a very important, very interesting program. And if not this year, next year, a crew of 4 persons, including a Canadian one, will turn around the moon, will gain a lot of experience in flying again to the moon after more than 50 years from the last moon landing of Apollo 17 in 1972. What is important as well is to organize different international events where both sides, I mean mainly China, of course included with Russia, but Russia has a lower role now than China. China is the most powerful one after the US. US and China could discuss at the international level. Last year, in the beginning of the COPOS session, was organized by OSA, by the Office for Outer Space Affairs, an international conference on lunar activities. And at the podium, they set together the representatives of ILRS, China mission to the moon, and also Artemis Accords. And sharing their opinions and views on different things connected with the moon, we just noticed that a lot of things, they could be combined, and they are common to all nations flying to the moon. That was the first international conference where we put together these nations and these representatives. And I'm quite sure they will be able to take part in other international events connected with the moon exploration, exploitation, and use. And step by step, we'll detense a little bit the situation at the international level and make the people to understand each other. The transparency, it's a very important problem when you are very transparent when you act into space. The other part, it's more relaxed because they know what you want to do. the communication is also very important at this level.
Marc, do you have a perspective on this question?
Well, I think Dorin explained it very well, and that, in fact, and the question is excellent, and that, in fact, is part of his mandate as the head of this action team. There's a little bit of an irony here because the Apollo program, which successfully went to the moon, was highly motivated by a competition with the Soviet Union. It was the first big space race. There's a space race going on now for the moon. And so there's a tendency when the players are each trying to be the first to do something important to want to keep things to themselves and not necessarily cooperate. But if ever there was an argument for them to work together so that things can be done in an orderly fashion, I can't think of a stronger argument because we do not want to ruin the possibilities of science and respect for the development that's going to be done on the moon. Not an easy thing to do when everybody is competing, and it's not just China and the United States and Russia, it's also India has important designs. India and Russia want to put humans by 2040 on the moon as well. So everybody's going there, and then there are other countries going there as well that, you know, that have been there already. South Korea wants, you know, it's not always successful, but they want to go there. Japan's been going there for quite a while. So it's really important to try to get that cooperation together, and not easy to do.
Okay, next question. Behind a pool here.
Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm a political science student studying at UBC right now. And my question is, it goes out to both of you, but... Oh, closer? Okay, sorry. What would you say that the most important event in your career that really inspired you to get into politics would be? Because both of you kind of started in this more, I guess, technical aspect in going to space, but you both stepped into politics eventually. Why is that?
Well, I was approached, I was 56, and I was president of the Canadian Space Agency. So my job was to run the Canadian Space Program. My political masters were the ones that authorized the budget and what I could do. I could make all sorts of suggestions to them about the way that the direction of the Canadian Space Program, but ultimately they made the decision. And ultimately I had to execute. And I thought it would be nice to be on the other side of the table because I, for one thing, wanted to increase our capability, Canada's capability in space. So I think that was a very strong motivator for me.
So actually, I was not involved in politics at the level of my country. I was involved just in the policies, space policy, anywhere, in any organizations I deal with. Actually, being the first cosmonaut of my country and reaching pretty high positions as the ambassador in the Russian Federation, leading the Office for Science and Technology within the European Commission and so on, the people just trusted me, and all my opinions expressed in front of the politicians were more or less taken into consideration. But not any time happen these things because the political interest of different parties just differ from one period of time to another period of time. But I try also to impose some things that I know very well. For instance, as I said now, with this ATLAC, I convinced my Ministry of Foreign Affairs to be in front of these initiatives and to push it on behalf of Romania. Also, we have proposed this year, at the level of the General Assembly of the UN, to proclaim the 2029 year, the International Year for Planetary Defense and dealing with the asteroid threats. and it was approved, and it is in the last resolution of the United Nations. It was also an initiative pushed by us, by me, behind the Romanian delegation, and we deal, because I deal with asteroids from long time. In 2025, I was part of the first working group of the Association of Space Explorers dealing with asteroids. Rusty Schweikart was the main engine there. Rusty is now 88 years old, and it's still pushing the things in this respect. We issued a very powerful report on asteroids and proposed it as a working document to the UN. And then, of course, we had different other initiatives. Now there are 2 international organizations dealing with the asteroids, with the defense against the asteroids, with promoting the discoveries much more than till now of the asteroids and so on. So that was the reason that I had a lot of background in this respect, and I promoted at the level of the UN on behalf of my country all these things. So it's not easy to do it, because you have to be at the same time very skilled and to present the things in the way to be accepted. I told you before, just not being only an cosmonaut, astronaut. So we don't make a difference between cosmonauts and astronauts. It's just the name in different languages. But I can tell you that the French one's name Spationaut. So even I knew in Malaysian it's Angkasa 1. It's not astronaut, it's not cosmonaut. It's the person flying into the outer space. So we don't make any difference. But not only as a cosmonaut, being a military person, so becoming, before the space flight, a military person, I graduate from different geopolitical courses, diplomatic courses, and I could combine all these things to have a more clear vision of the future and of what is necessary to do in this respect.
Great. Next question. Okay, lots of hands down here.
Hi, my name is Lachlan. I'm a 4th-year student here at UBC. My question for you is, what do you think is the biggest opportunity or challenge that the ever-increasing stake that private companies have in space will be?
The biggest opportunity for private companies?
What are the biggest challenges or opportunities that you think like countries will have with the ever-increasing stake that private companies have in space?
Okay, so historically, of course, if you go back 20 years, the only funding for space came from governments, because the business community saw no business case. They were not willing to reach deep into their pockets and spend a lot of money because, or give it away for a good cause, because they didn't feel that this was a viable commercial opportunity. Then along came people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, and there have been others who are less well known, who saw an opportunity for commercial space development, and we're seeing that a lot now. I think the two can work together. There's no question. Dorin hinted at it when he spoke in a previous question. The private sector is very good at innovating and doing it more quickly and less expensively. They just hustle more. Governments do a good job, but they're more cautious, and they take a little bit longer, and so each has its strengths. The private sector is never going to get into certain areas where space is involved. For example, they're not going to do scientific, missions to study the upper atmosphere. It's just not a business case. But they see opportunities for themselves in communication satellites in particular, or providing rocket services like SpaceX, and perhaps this New Glenn rocket from Jeff Bezos from Blue Origin. And as long as they see a business case, they're going to want to be there. And I think it's important for countries to allow that to happen. But again, getting back to a point that I talked about before, in a regulated manner. A final point is that if private companies, and a private company went to the moon last year, and it didn't work out because the thing when it landed fell over. But the issue of a commercial company wanting to put a spacecraft on the moon, there has to be an authorization from the country from which that private initiative comes from. And that's a debated thing at the moment, and it's not fully resolved. But there has to be some permission given, an authorization by the country from which that private company is working from. So there's that issue of controlling it, regulating it, but overall I think it's a positive thing because it will stimulate and make space development go faster.
What I want to add, of course, I fully agree with what Marc said, is that we have now 5 international instruments that have to be respected by all countries and all institutions, all organizations in the world. The most important one is the Outer Space Treaty from 1967. And if there are so many private companies now, the country where they are registered is responsible that they respect all the provisions of these treaties. And you have to have the instrument inside the country to check it and to make them to respect all these things.
Yeah, I guess I'll give my 2 cents on this too, because I thought it was a great question, but a sector that comes to my mind immediately is defense. If you look at US national space strategies now, they all talk about commercial integration into their national defense architecture. So using SpaceX satellites for communication in the military, and then Earth observation satellites as well for weapons navigation. A great example of this is the Russia-Ukraine war. You know, when Russia invaded Ukraine, SpaceX stepped in to give communication satellites to the Ukrainian military as the Viasat terminals were hacked and they couldn't use. And without that support, the Ukraine military wouldn't be where they are right now. So I think it was also a great PR stunt for SpaceX in terms of, you know, what they can offer militaries, and I'm sure they got a lot of contracts out of that, even though they provided this service for free to Ukraine. But that's, you know, the first one that comes to my mind. But as you know, I agree with my colleagues here, and as Dorin pointed with the 5 space instruments, and that governments are responsible for what private companies incorporated in their territory do. This comes with, you know, a big risk of what can private companies and therefore governments be held accountable for. Great. Next question. Wow, lots. Right. We'll do the left here, the woman in the gray sweatshirt. Yeah, you.
Hi, my name's Lexi. I'm a first year actually planning to go into the field of astrophysics and space science. So I wanted to talk about, you know, politics in space science. You know, on one side, you have things like the space race happening and coming out of a point of competition between different countries, and that's how we actually advance so quickly. On the other hand, you have things such as, you know, you're talking now, the collaboration aspect and how this competition can cause information to be withheld, and that can, you know, take away from the overall learning and the knowledge that we gain. I'm wondering, do you think that politics should have a say in space science? And if so, how much of space science in general should be influenced by politicians?
My personal viewpoint is that that space science is probably the one area where there's the highest likelihood of sharing that knowledge, because usually what the people behind it are scientists, and scientists inherently want to share that knowledge. There's no tactical reason for hiding important scientific information. And the approach that Canada has been taking, going all the way back to 60 years ago, has been that we have worked with many other countries bilaterally so that we could do science together and share the costs of those projects. You know, Alouette 1, which I mentioned in 1962, was launched on a Thor Agena rocket out of Vandenberg by the Americans. Why? They were willing to launch a Canadian satellite because they wanted the data from it. It did ionospheric physics back then, which was very, very important, made Canada the world leader in ionospheric physics. So there was a win-win situation there where the science was shared with them and eventually led to many, many papers and what have you. And to take a modern example, if you look at the James Webb Space Telescope, well, Canada, again, is a partner there. We built 2 of the instruments. One is the fine guidance sensor, and another one is an IR infrared sensor as well. The fine guidance sensor allows the James Webb Space Telescope to point incredibly accurately, which it has to be able to do to make some of those gorgeous pictures that you see. So Canada, and that's an example at each end of the last 60 years. There have been tons of them in between where Canada has worked with other countries, not just the United States, but you know, with the European Space Agency, with the Japanese, with the Swedish and others. And that scientific information is shared. You heard earlier on about lacking, Dorin brought up the point that the data was sometimes not shared. That gets more into basically what people are going to do when they want to orbit something around the moon. It's important for countries to know what those orbits are, and they can't be kept secret. He talked about the 41 red alarms because countries weren't sharing information and spacecraft were going to bump into each other. That's where the sharing of data should not be sort of a sticking point. But in space science, generally, scientists want to share their wonderful discoveries.
I want just to bring you an example of a situation that happened today. You see, on the ground, it's a war. NATO against Russia, Ukrainian against Russia, a lot of sanctions and such things. Into the outer space, the Russians fly with American spacecrafts. The Americans fly with Soyuz spacecrafts. They work together on board the International Space Station. And they are friends up there. So it's one of the examples where the situation on Earth and the political fights between different countries, it's less influential to the outer space. The interest to cooperate into the outer space and the cost of cooperation, it's so high that they don't have to be touched by different other interests on the ground. And I think if this can multiply to other fields of activities, will be good. But for now, we have only this example of continuing cooperation between the Russians and Americans, and on the other side, having so disastrous war on the ground.
Let's go up there to the woman in the middle, up there. If you could wave, I think that's you, yeah. Sorry, it's harder for me to see you right at the back.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Hi, my name is Sanjia. I'm a second-year atmospheric science major here at UBC, and I heard Marc said that we should give scientists more space to use space. Wait, okay, yeah. And I'm kind of curious on how would you balance that with the junks that still exist on the space out there. Yeah, I'm particularly curious about that, and if there is any steps or like plans being done right now, what would it be?
You mean space debris?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think I tried to convey the fact that we need to provide our scientists with the opportunity to go to space so that they can observe either back here on Earth or explore the rest of the universe. James Webb, for example, is interested in the rest of the universe. It's a long way from Earth. There are a lot of, I remember when I was president of the Canadian Space Agency, a small spacecraft called MOST, which came from UBC. Microvariability, it was a telescope, small telescope, microvariability and oscillation of stars. These were giving Canadian scientists in our universities the opportunity to put a sensor up in space so that they could either look back at Earth or look out into the universe. That has to continue. Now, when you put something up there, you can't just sort of say, well, I want to put it at, because they orbit. You can't just say, I have decided that I want this to orbit at 800 kilometers above the Earth at a certain orbital inclination, or to have a highly elliptical orbit or what have you. You have to get that approved by an international body, and this is where we're concerned because there's so many now, that makes sure that the possibility of collision is minimized. Because, and the frequency allocations, because there are frequencies involved in transmitting data or receiving data, those have to be approved for communication satellites, for example, that kind of thing. So all of this requires international bodies to make it approval. It's basically like traffic control here in Vancouver during rush hour. You have to make sure that there's a system to make sure that cars aren't just bumping into each other all the time. And scientific satellites are part of that mix of orbiting satellites around the planet.
I can tell you that there are some regulations issued by the UN Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space, some guidelines for avoiding producing more space debris in the future. The European Space Agency has task to accomplish in the few years to make zero debris from any launch. One of the important things is that to have the capacity on board of any satellite to bring it back to the atmosphere when it finishes its life. And to have a reserve of fuel to can orient the satellite and turn on the engine and put it direct into the atmosphere. It's one of the things. In any case, there are tens of thousands of space debris, dangerous space debris into the outer space, starting with small pieces like a screw or something like that, to big engines and even stages of rockets that launch satellites into the outer space. I can tell you that pretty frequently the International Space Station maneuvers to avoid a collision with space debris. The problem of bringing back the space debris, it's a challenging problem because first, they are not all together just to capture and bring them back to the Earth. You have to target the big debris in the beginning, and there are a lot of companies developing technologies now to bring back the space debris to the atmosphere and to destroy them. Even I know it's a Japanese company that wants to make a proposal to all satellite producers to put on the satellite a magnet, a pretty powerful one, and they have the spaceship going to the satellite, sticking to the magnet with another one, pushing the satellite to the atmosphere, and leaving them to go to the Earth. The problem of catching these parts into the outer space, it's a very important problem. Even if you want to do it, not any time is successful. With a magnet could be successful. But there is a problem. There are regulations, and we try to avoid producing any more space debris.
Oh my word. We have the gentleman to the left here.
Hi, I'm a student at UBC. I study engineering, and I was just wondering, kind of shifting gears, on Earth, like mining is obviously one of the most destructive industries that we have, and I was wondering what you guys think about if there's a future, if there should be a future to moving those extraction industries outside of the Earth's atmosphere where they can't, damage our planet.
Actually, there are a lot of ideas of mining the asteroids. In the beginning, the big industry thought about mining asteroids because some of them, they are formed by different minerals, very necessary to the Earth, and the big quantities, pretty pure on some asteroids. But then they orient the mining experiments in the beginning on the moon, because moon is much closer and they could experience all these devices to mine on the other space bodies and then to apply them to other planets or to the asteroids. But for the beginning, when we look for space resources on the moon, we want to use them in situ for the beginning, to build our houses there, to build our technology right there in the moon, to use them for 3D printing and so on. And then we can think about exploring rare minerals on other space bodies. It's just at the beginning, the idea, and the technology is developing. It's developing pretty fast to do it. Let's see in the next years what will happen.
Next question. We'll have the woman right in front of you, Beatrice.
Hi, my name is Paulina. First of all, it is an honor to be here. I was super excited for this conference. I wrote the questions down just to not forget. So I am very interested in space debris. First of all, little introduction. I'm specializing in aerospace materials, minoring in astronomy. So that's why I'm here, very interested. So again, with space debris, so how do you think the Kessler syndrome could realistically impact future space missions? And we've been speaking about what we should do as not only as individual nations, but also like in general as humanity to prevent more space debris. But are the current mitigation efforts actually enough to prevent something as a Kessler syndrome? And also, how should responsibility of cleaning up space debris be divided among nations? For example, considering historical contributions from the US and Russia, for example.
I guess I'll explain the Kessler syndrome quickly to those who don't know. I think the full name is the Kessler-Palais-Core syndrome, and that is all the scientists who were involved. And this is a theory that will be generating so much space debris that eventually we'll reach this point where it will cascade and more debris will be formed in sort of an endless cycle of debris generation that to a point might mean that there's so much debris in certain orbits that we can't even pass through them anymore. And so this is a concern for low Earth orbit in particular, that we will become trapped sort of on Earth and within a particular, orbit space, and we wouldn't be able to, visit the moon or use higher orbits or deep space exploration. But Marc or Dorin, do you have an answer to the question?
Just told a few things about the space debris. Maybe Marc, if you have to add something.
Yeah, I think that ultimately the best way to deal with, first of all, Dorin talked about the debris that's up there, and if it's at a fairly high altitude, it's going to be there for a very, very long time. The spacecraft that are dead, that are closer to the lower atmosphere or closer to Earth, they will eventually decay, but it could be a long time. I think in the long run, the best approach is to get consensus that if you're going to launch something into space, and that something is going to be left there, whether it's the spacecraft at the end of its life or the second stage body that's there, that you should design it in such a way, as Dorin explained, that you keep some fuel in it so that it can do a deorbit burn and burn up on re-entry. I think ultimately that is the best way to do it. Now, today there are countries that are beginning to think that way and companies doing it, but there are still companies that don't. They just, you know, they don't care. They put their thing up there and the heck with it. And so that attitude has got to be changed so that we don't keep adding to it so that we end up with this syndrome that you're talking about.
Next question, gentleman down at the front here.
Thank you. Jamie Matthews, UBC astronomer. We're going to Mars, apparently. What is the biggest thing about Mars? What do you have to go to get there, which we don't know yet?
Well, first of all, nice to see you, Jamie. You know, I mentioned a minute ago that UBC, a scientist here, was responsible for the most satellite, and that's Jamie Matthews, and he's here today, so nice to see you.
Thank you.
I didn't recognize you. There's a lot of light glaring down on us here. Are you basically asking what's the biggest challenge to getting to Mars?
Yes.
You know, technically we can do it. You know, I would say that we can definitely do it if there was an Apollo kind of effort back, you know, as in the 60s to get to Mars and to come back. I think we could probably do it within 15, 20 years. But the Apollo program only happened because there was a huge, strong national will and no expenses were out of bounds. You could spend as much, because it was a space race. So I think that there's no question that human ingenuity can take us to Mars in 20 years if there's a concerted effort to do it and money is no object. But I'm not sure, notwithstanding what Trump said in his inaugural speech about rushing to Mars, which shows the influence of Elon Musk, of course. Notwithstanding that, I don't know if there is sufficient national will for a country to go it alone and to the huge expenses. Now, cooperating with other countries sometimes makes that more possible. The shuttle program was helped by the fact that Canada contributed the Canadarm, because the Americans tactically decided we're going to have a better chance of getting the shuttle program when they were designing it in the 70s approved if we can show that there's international cooperation. It'll be harder for Congress to turn it down. And Canada was contributing the Canadarm, and the ESA was contributing the Space Lab, and so there was a tactical reason for doing that. And I think that in the case of a mission to Mars, if, you know, half a dozen countries or even more, hopefully, got together and all agreed to do it, then it has more chance of succeeding.
What I'm very curious of is that we really discover some biological traces on Mars. I'm quite sure, but it's not demonstrated that maybe 1, 2, 3 million years ago, Mars was a living planet. We have a lot of proofs that on Mars was water, rivers, lakes, seas, and so on. Where all these things disappear. We just studied Mars to see what could be the future of our planet and to understand much better what happened in the solar system in the last millions of years. And all this program with Perseverance to collect samples of Mars soil from different places and then to think how to bring them back to the Earth and to study. It's a very important moment when we can find more than studying on the surface of the Mars, find more about the planet and about the past of the planet. I'm really convinced that Mars was a living planet sometimes. And I don't want to go too far and to say that maybe we are the heritors of the Martians, but the influence in the solar system of life life could be spread anywhere. When it finds conditions to develop, it develops. And on the ground, on the Earth, it found really conditions to develop. On many planets and on many natural satellites of the big planets, there is water. Even more than on the Earth, even if they are smaller. But where it's water, we think that it's a place where life could develop. Let's see, on Mars it's also water. Not only on the poles, they discover water in some other places. I'm very curious myself what will happen with Mars.
Okay. Vivian, the woman in front of you in the purple or the pink? Yeah. And in the interest of time, this will be the last question.
I'm Sasha, first-year student. I was wondering if there are any good books or important books that you guys would recommend to read.
Well, there's Marc's memoir.
Can I make an unabashed plug for my book?
What's the most important books you've read?
I don't know if the person who had the table outside is still there, but there were some copies of the book there, and go into a lot more detail than I've been able to do today. But no, there are lots of very good books about space. It depends on whether your interest is in astronomy or astrophysics or human exploration or what have you. But there are a lot of excellent books out there. I'm not going to recommend any one in particular, but just Google it and you'll find lots of good stuff.
I guess another plug I can make is Michael and Aaron have written a book called Who Owns Outer Space, which covers both the astrophysics sides and the legal side, so that gives a good comprehensive overview, and that's open access as well. So you can download it as an EPUB or a PDF. But as we come to the end of this event, I'd like to thank all of you for attending and for your thoughtful engagement throughout. So a round of applause for you guys. I would also like to extend a special thank you for our speakers, Marc and Dorin, for sharing their perspectives, insights, and experience with us. And lastly, on a personal note, I'd like to thank MDA Space for supporting this public lecture series. I will now give the floor back to Michael to wrap up the lecture.
Someone has to thank Charlotte for being such a wonderful moderator. And the rest of our team who organized this event. It takes a lot of work to put on an event like this. So thank you, Beatrice. Thank you, Vivian. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Richard. An awful lot of hours went into this, so much appreciated. I want to close on a personal note. I knew John MacDonald for almost 2 decades, and when Aaron and I were thinking about creating a body, an institution, a center of some sort, to bring together our very different kinds of expertise. John was incredibly enthusiastic. He was enthusiastic about a lot of things, but he was enthusiastic about this. And I remember him urging us to think big, to think global, to be transdisciplinary, to tackle the grand challenges, and to attract and mentor the very best young people in the world. We're still young, the Outer Space Institute, but I think we're accomplishing some of the things that he asked us to do. We have an astrophysicist here who is a really good international lawyer. We have a political scientist here who can explain the Kessler syndrome. There are a dozen people in this room who are fellows or junior fellows of the Outer Space Institute who really personify that understanding that you can't deal with these grand challenges unless you're actually talking across all different disciplines and expertise. And
I close on this because I know that John would be really proud of the fact that we put these two gentlemen on stage together, right? These are transdisciplinary people, right? This is a young Romanian Air Force pilot who became the chair of the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. This is a naval engineer who became transport minister and then foreign minister of a G7 country, and on the way went to space 3 times. These are extraordinary Renaissance people. And so I just want to close by saying that we remain inspired by John MacDonald's vision. I know that he's looking down on us from the stars, his friends, and that he would approve of everything that happened this evening, including all the fabulous questions from so many wonderful young people. So thank you very much.